Hello everyone, from massive mudslides to waterfalls right in the heart of the city. It's time to witness the most powerful and unexpected floods and admire the sheer force of nature. Let's get started. It's a good thing people are filming these events, reminding us that we should respect nature. After all, it is capable of so much more. Imagine standing in a peaceful countryside. Birds chirping across the hillsides. A gentle river winding through lush green fields, and then, in the blink of an eye, everything turns completely upside down. The sky suddenly turns pitch black, heavy leaden clouds sink down right above the treetops, and a terrifying roar echoes from upstream. That is not thunder, nor is it the engine of any modern machinery. It is the scream of the great forest as a flash flood abruptly surges down. The most realistic footage from the scene exposes a brutal reality when nature unleashes its wrath. It never gives a warning, and its destructive power goes far beyond anything humans can imagine. That ferocious flood, like a colossal liquid monster, charges straight from high mountain, peaks down to the lower lands at a terrifying speed, sweeping away everything in its path. On both riverbanks, where solid houses and joyful homes once stood, it has now become a death zone. The violent water slams directly into the foundations, gouging deep into the ground and creating massive hollow caves underneath. People can only hear the sharp, dry snapping of reinforced concrete being crushed and the cracking of brick walls. Then, right before their helpless eyes, an entire two-story house collapses, shattering into the muddy red water and completely vanishing in just a few short seconds like a cardboard model. The nightmare does not stop there as the flood continues to assault public infrastructure and vital transportation lifelines. Reinforced concrete bridges, once thought to be impenetrable symbols of connection and trade between regions, suddenly become incredibly fragile before the raging torrent. The water rises high above the bridge deck, its immense pressure forcing against the piers and causing them to shake violently, as massive tangles of tree trunks, debris, and silt pack tightly against the structure. They generate a tremendous force that snaps the large bridge spans, dragging the entire solid concrete framework down into the ferocious river and completely cutting off the rescue routes of emergency forces. Culverts and roads are severely destroyed. The asphalt surface is peeled away by the floodwaters in massive chunks, like crispy wafers. Looking down from above, the entire area along both riverbanks resembles a desolate battlefield after a heavy bombardment. Yet, perhaps the most horrifying and haunting thing about this year's storm season is the terrifying variations of the floods. Amidst the torrential downpour, some video clips capture scenes where the rushing torrent contains no visible water at all, but only a thick, dense mass of mud and rocks. This is a debris flow, one of the most devastating natural disasters with the highest density of sheer destruction. After days of soaking up heavy rain on high mountain slopes, millions of cubic meters of earth and rock lose their cohesion, suddenly crashing down and mixing with water to form a sludge as thick as lava, but moving at an incredibly terrifying speed. This mudflow is dozens of times heavier than ordinary water. It doesn't meander around obstacles, but uses its extreme weight and kinetic energy to crush and flatten everything. Boulders as large as compact cars are carried away by the mud, rolling uncontrollably down the hills, smashing through walls, and crushing motorcycles and trucks parked along the road. When this mudflow sweeps through villages and residential areas, it doesn't wash the houses away to distant places. It buries them right where they stand. Houses are submerged in deep mud up to their roofs, while schools and medical clinics are blanketed by a dull, grey coat of dirt and sand. When the flood passes, what it leaves behind is not an empty ground for people to clear, but a vast, thick quagmire that later hardens like concrete. tightly locking away all assets, memories, and even the lives of those who could not evacuate in time beneath the deep earth at the same time from another camera angle. Viewers cannot help but shudder at the sight of floods consisting entirely of roots and dry branches, rushing down alongside pitch-black mud. This is the direct consequence of deforested headwaters or the overwhelming sweeping force of wild storms in the upper reaches. Tens of thousands of ancient tree trunks are uprooted and millions of rotten. Dry branches accumulated over many years in the deep forests are gathered by the ultra-powerful current and pushed downstream. They bind together into massive, towering rafts of wood drifting along the rivers. Imagine these gnarled, sharp stumps with their giant root systems racing forward at the speed of a race car. They turn into multi-purpose arrows that pierce through everything they touch. When these wooden rafts move to narrow river bends or culvert openings, they immediately get jammed, intertwining tightly with each other to form an accidental makeshift dam that completely chokes the flow. The floodwaters from behind keep piling up with no way out, instantly rising in a sudden surge and generating immense water pressure. And then the inevitable happens. When that dam of dry branches can no longer withstand the pressure, it bursts. The entire volume of trapped water explodes like a colossal water bomb, creating a brutal secondary flash flood that sweeps away the entire downstream residential area, where people had complacently assumed they were safe, standing in the shoes of a reporter stationed right here at the scene. I can clearly feel the bone-chilling cold of the rain, the pungent stench of mud mixed with the smell of rotting wood, and the heartbreaking cries of residents who have lost their homes. My professional intuition tells me that this is no ordinary seasonal flood. This is a life-or-death battle between humanity and the wrath of nature. Our cameras have to be wiped constantly from the rain, and much of the footage captured is violently shaky because the camera operators themselves have to hold on to traffic posts just to keep from being swept away by the current. Witnessing a middle-aged man standing frozen on a high mound of earth, his eyes staring blankly at the river where just a few minutes ago stood the home he had lived in for half his life, makes one truly understand the cruelty of natural disasters. All assets, papers, and priceless family keepsakes have been completely swallowed by the muddy red water. Humans become pitifully small and weak before the fierce, meters-high waves continuously crashing against the banks. The severity of this year's storm and flood season has reached a critical red alert as the entire supply of basic necessities, the power grid and communication lines in the heart of the flood zones have been completely severed. Villages have become lonely islands amidst a vast sea of water. Looking down from above, bobbing roofs and isolated treetops look like desperate arms reaching up for help. Rescue forces have had to work through the night, battling fierce waves, torrents of mud filled with boulders, and sharp, dry branches to reach every single rooftop and evacuate the elderly and young children out of harm's way. Many times, the inflatable rescue boats were on the verge of capsizing as they struck giant dry logs floating covertly beneath the murky. There would be water. Every single successful rescue is a breathless race against time, because the floodwaters keep rising and the ground beneath our feet could slide away at any moment when we sit in our solid safe houses and rewatch these videos through phone or computer screens. We might feel a shiver of fear, but for the people directly confronting it, this is a brutal reality they must endure. These short clips recorded by brave citizens or frontline reporters are the most vivid living evidence, the most profound wake-up call sent to all of us. Nature nurtures us, gives us life, but once the balance is broken, when protection forests are no longer strong enough to hold the soil and water, the price humans have to pay is extremely dear. These thick mudflows and deadly rafts of dry wood are the bitter response of the great forest when it's Green armor is compromised. The rain will eventually stop. The sunlight will reappear over the flood-stricken lands, and the ferocious water will ultimately recede back to the ocean. However, the wounds it leaves behind in the soil and in the hearts of the people will take an unknown eternity to heal. How many years will it take to rebuild the bridges that collapsed? How long will it take to clear millions of tons of mud currently blanketing the fields and villages? And most importantly, how do we erase the terrifying trauma in the minds of the children and residents who once stood right on the edge of life and death during this storm? Looking back at the entire destructive journey of these sudden floods, we cannot help but reflect on our place in this vast universe. Humans, with all our intellect and modern technology, can still find themselves utterly helpless before a single tempest or a rushing torrent. This footage is not just for us to watch and forget. It must serve as a serious reminder of gratitude, respect, and responsibility toward our natural environment. We must learn to live in harmony with nature instead of trying to dominate or destroy it. Because after all, nature has the capacity to do many great things to sustain us. But it also possesses more than enough power to take everything away from us in a single moment of rage. Let us cherish every moment of peace, and let us join hands in action before it is too late, so that these fierce floods will no longer be a terrifying nightmare with every returning storm season.